Europe stands as a geological palimpsest, where ancient seas, glacial epochs, and volcanic fury have inscribed narratives across a continent smaller than Antarctica, yet infinitely more complex. From limestone caverns, illuminated by Mediterranean light, to chalk cliffs, bearing witness to mass extinctions, these landscapes transcend mere scenery. They represent active chapters in Earth's ongoing autobiography. Tectonic collisions that assembled supercontinents, Ice Age glaciers that resculpted coastlines, and subterranean springs flowing for millennia converge to create natural wonders defying human timescales. These geological forces shaped human settlement patterns, spiritual beliefs, and survival strategies across millennia, creating landscapes where stone and culture interweave. These 10 locations reveal Europe as a unified geological theater, where carbonate platforms, volcanic calderas, and post-glacial coastlines demonstrate planetary transformation and humanity's persistent adaptation to environments carved by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Southwest of Skopje, the Treska River has incised a limestone gorge, approximately 9 miles long, carving through Paleozoic carbonate platforms to create vertical walls rising 800 feet above the water. This canyon represents classic karst topography, where slightly acidic water dissolves calcium carbonate along fracture networks, gradually widening fissures into caverns and enlarging the river channel through both mechanical and chemical erosion. The canyon contains more than 10 caves, including Vrelo Cave, whose explored passages extend over 2,300 feet into the limestone, though its full extent remains unknown. Divers have reached depths suggesting connections to a vast subterranean hydrological system. Medieval monks recognized the canyon's defensive and contemplative qualities, establishing monasteries along its walls, including the 14th century Church of St. Andrew, constructed on a narrow ledge where vertical cliffs provided protection from Ottoman advances. The river's impoundment behind a modern dam created a reservoir that submerged portions of historical settlements while concentrating water sports in a canyon that once served primarily as a defensive barrier and monastic refuge. The Bay of Kotor penetrates 17 miles inland from the Adriatic Sea. Its serpentine form creates 4 interconnected gulfs surrounded by limestone mountains, rising directly from the water to elevations exceeding 5,400 feet. This formation represents a drowned river valley, a ria, rather than a true fjord. Its morphology closely resembles Norwegian examples carved by glacial ice. The bay formed when post-glacial sea level rise flooded the valley system carved by the Skåda River. This process created a deep water harbor that attracted maritime civilizations for millennia. Illyrian tribes established fortified settlements along its shores. Roman conquest later integrated the bay into Mediterranean trade networks. Medieval maritime republics recognized its strategic value. Kotor developed as a significant Adriatic port, whose merchants and sailors competed with Venice for commercial dominance. The city's fortifications include walls ascending nearly 4,600 feet up the mountainside to St. John's Fortress. These structures demonstrate engineering adapted to extreme topography. Defense required vertical construction across slopes, approaching 45-degree angles. The bay's configuration creates microclimates. Mediterranean and alpine flora intermingle at unusually low elevations. The bay's deep waters have preserved archaeological evidence, including Roman shipwrecks. In São Miguel's volcanic highlands, twin lakes occupy the collapsed caldera of a stratovolcano that last erupted in 1445, their waters displaying distinctly different colorations, one green, one blue. This chromatic divergence stems from variations in depth, algal populations, and sunlight angle, though Portuguese settlers generated legends attributing the phenomenon to tears shed by a forbidden shepherd and princess. The caldera formed through catastrophic collapse following magma chamber evacuation, repeated across the Azores as African, Eurasian, and North American plates converge. Early Azorean communities established agricultural terraces along caldera walls, recognizing volcanic soils and microclimate protection created favorable cultivation conditions. The lakes rest at approximately 1,800 feet elevation, surrounded by peaks rising another 1,600 feet, creating basins where shepherds for centuries grazed cattle during summer months, developing transhumance patterns dictated by volcanic topography. These waters represent active volcanic monitoring sites, their chemistry providing early warning signals of subsurface magmatic activity. The Rila Mountains contain a glacial staircase of 7 interconnected lakes, arranged between 6,900 and 8,200 feet elevation, each occupying a cirque basin carved by Pleistocene ice sheets that retreated approximately 10,000 years ago. These horseshoe-shaped depressions demonstrate textbook glacial erosion, where ice plucked bedrock fragments, excavating cavities later filled by meltwater. The lakes descend in sequence: the Eye, the Kidney, the Twins, Trefoil Lake, the Fish Lake, and the Lower Lake, connected by cascades, tracing former glacial paths. Thracian peoples ascending these slopes millennia ago attributed divine properties to the lakes, establishing seasonal camps, where high priests performed rituals. Stone arrangements suggest ceremonial significance predating written records. Medieval Bulgarian monks carved hermitages into granite cliffs overlooking several lakes, choosing isolation, where winter proved brutal but summer provided clarity. Shepherds developed routes connecting the lakes, driving flocks between basins as snowmelt dictated pasture availability, creating pathways. Modern hikers follow along alignments determined by vanished ice. Stretching 310 miles along the North Sea coast, the Wadden Sea constitutes the world's largest unbroken tidal flat system, where twice-daily tides expose and submerge nearly 3,900 square miles of mudflats, salt marshes, and barrier islands. This dynamic landscape emerged following the last glacial maximum, when rising sea levels flooded the subsiding coastal plain. Frisian peoples settling these coasts during the early medieval period developed turpen artificial dwelling mounds rising above storm surge levels, constructing communities on elevated platforms where families maintained continuity despite periodic inundations claiming entire villages. Dutch hydraulic engineers, beginning in the 13th century, initiated dike construction projects that transformed portions into polders, creating agricultural land below sea level through technologies requiring constant maintenance against tidal forces. Barrier islands migrate inland at rates approaching 30 feet annually, driven by wave erosion and sediment deposition movements, periodically destroying fishing settlements and forcing populations to relocate according to geological rather than political imperatives. Along Saaremaa Island's northern coast, Panga Cliff rises 70 feet above the Baltic, exposing a cross-section through Silurian carbonate platforms deposited 430 million years ago, when this region occupied tropical latitudes. The cliff face reveals limestone and dolomite strata formed from calcareous organisms, corals, brachiopods, trilobites, accumulated on shallow marine shelves. Estonian peoples arriving after glacial retreat recognized the cliff's prominence, establishing it as a sacred site where pre-Christian rituals invoking sea deities occurred at the exposed edge, where land abruptly terminated. Archaeological evidence suggests animal sacrifices took place at the cliff summit, with bones discovered suggesting centuries of ceremonial activity before Christianization. Glacial isostatic adjustment following ice sheet retreat continues elevating the entire Baltic Shield at measurable rates, sustaining coastal erosion that refreshes the cliff face. Medieval Estonian communities utilized the cliff's strategic position, establishing observation posts where sentries could detect approaching vessels miles offshore during periods when Baltic control shifted between Danish, Swedish, German, and Russian powers. Where the Gulf of Bothnia narrows between Finland and Sweden, approximately 5,600 islands and skerries constitute Earth's most prominent example of post-glacial rebound, with land surfaces rising from the sea at rates approaching 0.35 inches annually. This uplift represents ongoing crustal response to ice sheet removal. When Scandinavian glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago, the mantle beneath began slowly rising to re-establish isostatic equilibrium. Finnish and Swedish fishing communities adapted settlement patterns to this ongoing emergence, with harbor locations requiring periodic relocation as previously navigable channels became impassable straits, then emerged as dry land connecting formerly separate islands. Church records from the 17th century document property disputes arising when submerged lands rose above sea level, creating novel territory whose ownership remained unclear. The archipelago's distinctive moraine ridges create parallel island chains where fishermen developed intimate knowledge of constantly shifting navigation routes. Families maintained farms on islands that expanded measurably across generations, with grandparents recounting rowing across straits that grandchildren walked upon dry land. This 6-mile coastal cliff exposes one of Earth's most complete records of the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, the geological instant 66 million years ago, when an asteroid impact near Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula triggered mass extinction events. The cliff's chalk layers, formed from microscopic calcite plates produced by coccolithophores, transition abruptly to a thin clay layer enriched with iridium, an element rare in Earth's crust but abundant in asteroids. This boundary represents global deposition of impact ejecta and environmental collapse, eliminating non-avian dinosaurs and approximately 75% of species. Stone Age peoples harvested flint nodules from the chalk, establishing workshops where knapping techniques produced tools from silica concentrations formed from marine sponge spicules millions of years earlier. Medieval communities quarried chalk for lime production, transforming blocks into mortar-binding churches and fortifications. Huihirup Old Church, constructed in the 13th century, originally stood 200 feet from the cliff edge. By 1928, erosion undermined its chancel, causing collapse into the sea, demonstrating human construction timescales prove insignificant against geological processes. Rising 400 feet above the Baltic, these chalk cliffs constitute Denmark's highest coastal formation, exposing Cretaceous seabed pushed into current position by Pleistocene glacial advances. Unlike typical horizontal sedimentary sequences, these chalk layers display dramatic folding and thrust faulting evidence that Scandinavian ice sheets, at their maximum extent, approaching 2 miles thick, generated sufficient pressure to deform substrate rocks. The chalk accumulated during late Cretaceous greenhouse climate when sea levels stood hundreds of feet higher, submerging much of Europe beneath warm oceans where coccolithophores proliferated. Danish folklore attributed the cliff's formation to supernatural agency, with legends describing a queen commanding chalk mountains raised to protect her realm narratives, recognizing defensive utility while misattributing geological to divine agency. Stone Age peoples established seasonal camps along the clifftop, accessing abundant flint, while hunting game attracted to coastal meadows. Medieval monks maintained medicinal herb gardens in protected valleys below. Recognizing microclimate conditions created by chalk walls allowed cultivation of species requiring warmer temperatures. Near Saranda, this karst spring emerges from depths exceeding 160 feet, discharging crystal-clear water, maintaining constant 50-degree temperatures while displaying deep blue coloration from light scattering. The spring represents discharge from an extensive underground aquifer system developed within Mesozoic limestone formations underlying much of the Balkans. Ancient Illyrian peoples attributed divine properties to the spring, establishing shrines where offerings were deposited into waters whose clarity and unfailing flow suggested supernatural origins. Rainwater percolates through fractures and dissolution cavities, traveling subterranean routes for miles before emerging at this focused discharge point. Byzantine chronicles reference the spring as a sacred site where pilgrims sought healing, believing waters, maintaining consistent temperature, possessed restorative properties. Ottoman records document the spring's incorporation into regional water supply systems, with engineers constructing channels, diverting portions of flow to irrigate orchards while respecting local prohibitions against entering the spring itself. Technological exploitation, constrained by cultural reverence, maintaining traditions across centuries. These 10 locations demonstrate Europe's role as condensed geological archive, where tectonic assembly, Paleozoic seas, Mesozoic marine dominance, glacial cycling, and post-glacial adjustment have layered complexity across a relatively compact continental fragment. Yet they also reveal how human populations adapted to, exploited, and revered landscapes shaped by forces indifferent to mortal timescales. From caves Romans claimed for imperial luxury to coastlines where families relocated according to glacial rebound rather than political decree, each site documents both planetary processes and human responses to environments refusing stability. Limestone dissolving molecule by molecule, continents rebounding from ice sheet pressure, communities relocating harbors as sea levels shift these landscapes, chronicle both Earth's perpetual transformation and humanity's persistent adaptation, challenging illusions of geological and cultural permanence while revealing a planet where change remains the only constant across all scales.